Hello again, and welcome to RP-0 America. Here we are over the moon, and let's see, we've got our test craft. Basically, what's all that's left of our Gemini direct craft, which was launched from a Saturn V in previous videos, and we've got it ready to leave lunar orbit. Oh right, I can't. Well, I can tell it to point at the node, I suppose. I can't lock SAS because there's no humans in, and we have insufficient computer control to use SAS apparently. So we are preparing for the burn, which will send us back from the orbit of the moon to intercept the Earth's atmosphere for hopefully a safe reentry. This will be one of the last steps in kind of proving that our craft is capable of sending humans to the surface of the moon and returning them safely to Earth. So it'd be pretty impressive if you could get people onto the surface of the moon, but if you can't return them safely to Earth, that victory is fairly limited because without being able to return safely to Earth, they die. So this is a pretty crucial step, even though we've completed a number of previous steps already. So let me see if execute node. Let us see if MechJeb will carry this out. Well, I think it's doing the burn early, but who knows? I mean, frankly, this burn isn't super crucial about the timing of it, really. As you can see, the burn was about 800 meters per second of delta V, and we have about, according to this readout, at least 1200 meters per second of delta V remaining in the service module here after returning from the surface of the moon to lunar orbit. So we may have additional fuel than more than we need. So even if MechJeb kind of duffs this burn, I can still correct it manually, and I still need to do some corrections for exactly to control the exact periapsis, where we end up coming back to the surface of the Earth. So you can see our orbit being changed here. This final engine has a pretty substantial at this point of the burn, because there's so little fuel left in the engines. It has a pretty substantial thrust-to-weight ratio, although compared to a lot of the other engines we used in the vicinity of the moon. All right, so I will accelerate this burn just a little bit because I think I can get all in this video. I think we can get to the surface. We can safely land, hopefully in water, in this video. Okay, approaching the end of that burn. Yeah, we have so little fuel. I'm surprised it still says we have that much delta V remaining. But I suppose it's just because the remaining bit of the capsule and life support systems are also light compared to the fuel that was in these tanks when they were full. Now it's at 10% fuel, but it still has a decent amount of delta V. And all right, engines, let's just, there we go, shut down. So let's see where that placed us. Okay, so it looks like we've got an intercept with the surface, I think, because it's not showing me a periapsis. Yeah, so it overburned a bit actually, so I'm just using the RCS right now manually to adjust that so that is outside of the inside of the Earth. All right, and so yeah, that's about right. I think it's somewhere between 40 and 60 kilometers. My memory isn't perfect of where I want to hit the atmosphere. So let's say that. So there are a couple ways to control where you land on the Earth. You have a bit, particularly at this point, we'd have, because of the deterministic nature of gravity in KSP, if I had a mod that would show me, where the Earth will have rotated to by the time we come back, then we would. That's probably a bad burn time. See, it's 5 days from where we are now to when we actually get back to the surface, whereas you could probably do that in 3 days, 4 days, but 5 days is still well within the life support reserves because we're only 4 days out from Earth, from our initial launch. It's just that's a longer return flight than usual. But you can control where you land. So let's say, 5 days, 6 hours. So the Earth will have rotated 6 hours more than, roughly 6 hours more than its current position. Like if it was exactly 5 days, the Earth would be in its same orientation, I think. And so 6 hours means 1/4 of a rotation of the Earth. So Pacific Ocean maybe, and the terminator where the daylight, the daytime and nighttime portions of the Earth are, I believe will stay pretty much the same during this period of return. So the Earth is going to rotate 5 1/4 turns. So this is my rough way of trying to guess. Like I said, there are mods which I don't know if any of them are updated, have been updated in a while, but I know I've previously looked at them. Yeah, so see, 1/4 of the Earth's turn puts us over the ocean. So assuming the other things I said are accurate, then we will be coming back in the water here. So by making fine-tune adjustments mid-course or even right now, I could change a bit, for just a couple of hours or so of time it takes to go from where the craft is now to that point there, near the our closest approach to the Earth, where we'll be beginning re-entry. So I could make those adjustments, and that would change how much time it took to get to where it is, kind of in the same vicinity of the Earth. So by changing that time, it would give the Earth more or less time to rotate its position during the transit while the craft is incoming. So I think this simple method of kind of eyeballing it, if you will, is probably sufficient for a return of a craft to the Earth from the Moon. But if you're, say, really interested in trying to send a craft towards Mars, say, or Venus or another body, and to intercept and to, say, let's say you want to do a direct landing on Mars from your initial, you go from Earth orbit, throw a craft at Mars, and then from that flyby of Mars, you want to intercept the atmosphere to slow you down for landing. You could use a similar idea to ensure that you land in the area that you want to land in. Now, in the Mars missions I'm interested in, I want to be able to land within like 500 meters or 5 kilometers or something like that of my target landing location, because I want to be able to land 2 craft at the same location for something like Mars Direct, say. Now that level of accuracy would take a lot more than just eyeballing, yes, we're going to be over the Pacific Ocean, So anyway, I'll just pass time here. Our resources will go down because to fuel this craft, it is running 3 fuel cells. I don't want to blow past the time. Let's see. So for a situation like this, what I usually do is set if it will let me, there we go, set a node. So warp to here. So time is going to go very fast as the craft comes towards here, and then it's going to slow itself down before we actually reach periapsis, at which point I can orient the craft. So where is Earth? It's got to be somewhere. There we go. There's Earth. Boy, is that big in the window. All right, so I'm going to set up a maneuver node. So let's see, 54 kilometers. I feel like that's okay. I'm going to do a quick save just in case I want to do a test of this again. And I'm pretty sure that's good enough for my landing. So I'm going to add a maneuver node. I want to be pointed backwards. That's the orientation, my desired orientation. Oh, wow. So we are 6,000 kilometers above the Earth, as you can see from it. See, it's not or is it 6,000? 6 million? Oh, conversion. I don't know. You probably know better than I do. I think that's right, though. 6,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, so 1/6 of the distance to geostationary orbit, I believe. And so the Earth is getting bigger, but it's still relatively small compared to how we usually see it from any low Earth orbit mission. So I'm going to orient the craft backwards here. So Gemini, as initially constructed and historically built, was really only tested to the standard of re-entering from low Earth orbit. And so that means you are moving less fast, and so the heat shield doesn't have to be as thick or as protective, doesn't have to be able to accept like such a high level of heating and such high temperature that you will receive from heating like this. So if you want to kind of act like you're using the historical Gemini capsule as originally constructed, then what you could do is basically do what I've done now, or some similar mission, but at this point you'd want to have set up your craft so you had, say, 2 or 3 kilometers per second of leftover fuel, so that when you were approaching the Earth, you could slow yourself down to that kind of low Earth orbit re-entry type speed. And so that would reduce how much stress your heat shield had to face during re-entry. What we're doing here, the way we've set up in FASA is, it was believed that there were studies done that the The Gemini heat shield could handle higher temperatures and could fairly cheaply and easily be rated and tested to handle re-entry from lunar return. So kind of that's the story we've gone with in our configuration of this. And so just as the craft is being configured, the Gemini heat shield isn't nearly as powerful as the Apollo heat shield is, which is on the borderline. The Apollo heat shield is on the borderline of being able to re-enter from Mars return speeds, whereas the Gemini could. I definitely don't think it could do that. I think at some point in configuring this Gemini heat shield, I've tested that to confirm that it wouldn't be able to do that. Although with the various KSP updates and everything updates, I should be dumping this right quick. There we go. And turning on, let's see, enable RCS ports. So I'll just kind of, hopefully we can get that out of the way before the atmosphere bites us. I'll let this go through a quick spin. Anyway, so long story short, Gemini isn't as, the Gemini heat shield as configured here is not as capable or thick or anything as the Apollo heat shield is for the Apollo crew capsule in FASA, but it is substantial enough to handle a return at the speeds we're doing now. Or at least I hope so, because I've experimented with it in this regard a few times, and that's not a surefire, say, number. Like in, say, testing for it, I think I usually would test at 10.5 kilometers per second. Right now we're moving faster than that, so I could have used some of the remaining fuel in that. I just love watching something float away in zero-G like that, particularly when it's got some kind of random orientation. It's just so cool. Goodbye, service module. So there is definitely a chance that I will have substantial trouble in this reentry. Ooh, and let's see, was it in MechJeb? I think it's in MechJeb. Let's see if I can quickly whip this out. There's a, flight recorder. There's a way to get a graph, and I absolutely love graphs. And so let's show things like, I'm going to have to kind of adjust these things. Mark reset. Let's go with altitude. There we go. So we're seeing data there. So let me just control my orientation. Apologies if I move the camera in ways that make you dizzy or annoyed. Just kind of want to see where I am in space. All right, so we are over. So it looks like I was right. I was really close to right, actually. Yep, so I just the Earth rotated 5 times under our craft. All right, so this is going to show the altitude of our craft and pitch, speed, acceleration. So acceleration is important to me as well, because that's how we're going to be, that will show us slowing down. Hopefully the spacecraft can survive. If not, I will have to regroup and try this again. But as you can see, we are just pounding down towards the atmosphere. So I will enable re-entry mode. Where are you? Turn descent mode on. There we go. So that simulates the offset of the center of mass. It's probably, no, decouple. Let's see if I can get rid of that. Oh, weird, the atmosphere. Oh no, I think that's right. The atmosphere isn't biting very hard yet, but it should start biting soon. We are definitely within the atmosphere. You can see the dynamic pressure is increasing. So now, oh, that's probably the issue. Come on. I need to close this damn antenna, retract. It's not like that antenna will be useful anyway during reentry. There we go. So now it's taking the orientation that I expect it to. So we are starting to slow down. We've transferred through the PQS scaled space view. All right, so I will be controlling the roll rotation of the spacecraft. So you can see I'm not directly retrograde, and that is because the center of mass of this craft is offset, just like the actual Gemini and the actual Apollo were offset to generate lift. So you will see this orbital parameter change as a result of that. Because of what I'm doing now, I'm overall generating lift, which kind of acts as an acceleration upwards, which means I won't be digging quite as deep into the atmosphere. All right, let's reset these, mark and reset these scales now. Oh, that's a good point. I could probably close that. Alright, so hoping that the craft does not overheat. We're losing substantial amounts of ablator. We're probably at very high temperature. Fun things like that. So I'm watching vertical speed. So this is going to peak around when this vertical speed hits 0. And it kind of, depending what our speed and orbital parameters are at that point, will determine what roll position I will take. You'll see what I mean by that. So right now I'm oriented so that we're generating lift. But here, because we haven't yet dropped below orbital speed, we haven't dropped below about 7.2 or 7.6 kilometers per second, I'm rolling to a position that will make sure that we don't skip out of the atmosphere. And that is the beauty of having the offset center of mass, which allows us to generate lift as a function of our roll position. Because if I hadn't been able to change that, we would have just skipped off the atmosphere. So this provides you a substantial amount of control during re-entry, which is particularly useful if you're coming in from at a velocity which doesn't guarantee re-entry. Like if you come in from low Earth orbit, you're really just controlling the g-forces you feel, whereas with this, if we didn't have the level of control we have, we would have actually skipped off the atmosphere. It might have even not have come back around back to Earth. You know, if we still had enough speed, we're past lunar escape. So you can see the acceleration. It hit a very substantial peak. Actually, I can change the other way. I can change the scale of this graph so it's easier to see, because I love graphs. So you can see our speed is dropping. You can see our altitude. See it kind of peaked there, and then we skipped just a little bit. So this was a fairly ideal re-entry, other than that we hit very, very high levels of acceleration, like survivable, like not physical, not permanent physical damage, I don't believe. But I usually try, when I'm experimenting with it or configuring things, I try to keep it under like 5 Gs or so. 4.5, 5 Gs. I believe that's possible with the Gemini craft. It's because the lift drag ratio, is that the right value? I think that's right. LD, L over D, value of the Apollo capsule is greater. It means it can generate more lift. It has more control over its re-entry characteristics. And with an Apollo, you can have better control over your peak re-entry g-forces. So here I'm just kind of holding this up orientation, and this is just going to minimize g-forces. If I were to turn it off right now, I believe our g-forces, our peak g-forces would come up again. I may as well, just to show, turn that off. So right now we were generating lift so that we weren't continuing to fall. We were kind of bleeding off speed fairly close to our current altitude and only gradually losing altitude. So that once we're down in the actually much thicker parts of the atmosphere, we will be moving much slower. But here, this will probably end up going up. Yeah, as you can see there, and that's okay. That should it should still stay below survivable values. But this to me, this just illustrates the importance of having that lift drag ratio, to have an offset center of mass on any craft you're bringing back from very high speeds. If they hadn't had that ability, if just the way reality was that method of craft control wasn't possible, then bringing people back from space would be much more challenging to do, even just from low Earth orbit. So without using this, often then the method of return is called a ballistic reentry. And in a couple instances, in the Mercury capsule didn't have this ability, didn't have an offset center of mass, and so all of its reentries were ballistic reentries, accordingly with higher peak g-forces that they would hit. Just set these action groups up as I'm going to need them. And Gemini and Apollo and the Soyuz craft, they use this lifting reentry, and they have the ability to default to a ballistic reentry. I'm not exactly sure what that means, exactly how they accomplish that, because the way that they actually offset the mass is by having the people and equipment inside the capsule offset from the center of mass, which, as with the Soyuz returns from the space station nowadays, they finally balance where that center of mass will be when they load up the capsule for return to Earth. So I'm not sure exactly how they get a ballistic trajectory even if the center of mass is offset. One theory I have, which I'm pretty sure is the correct way, I might even read this at some point, that they would achieve that, is if you were spinning it, like rather than holding a specific roll orientation, if you were spinning the craft like this. I'm not sure why the water isn't showing. At least to me this looks like I'm looking through the water. Anyway, this, sometimes you stack enough things onto into a realism overhaul install, you end up with weird bugs. But I'm definitely over the Pacific Ocean. Alright, so I'm just going to drop that. So if you were to spin up a craft like this, because you're not holding a specific orientation, like integrated over a second or so, you go through all of you're going through all these roll positions, and as a result, you don't get a net. You're not getting a lift to drag ratio in one specific direction. It's pulling you down or pushing you up. And so I think that's the way, just by kind of spinning up the craft lightly, and then rather than trying to control the roll position, they just let it spin. I believe that simulates a ballistic reentry, which has been done a couple of times with the Soyuz. I don't recall if it ever happened with Gemini, where they had to undergo a ballistic reentry. But it's the backup. They design the missions so that if every space mission they can, that if that happens, they kind of end up in an emergency situation or some equipment fails where they have to do a ballistic reentry, they still set it up that in case that were one of the kind of emergency paths they had to take, that it would still be a survivable ballistic reentry. It might cause permanent physical damage or pain to the crew, but like if you hit say 10, 15 Gs, imagine your own mass times 10 or 15 that your body has to bear. That's a lot of stress on your body, a lot of stress on your spine, and so that can cause like permanent back injury, permanent bone injury, particularly with the space station, say, or any long duration space mission. If you're coming back and your bones are weakened, you could break bones facing that many G forces. And I know there was a Soyuz escape, like on the launch pad they had to use the abort system, which also hits a very high G-force to, as quickly as possible, pull the crew away from whatever catastrophe has caused them to need to leave their spacecraft behind, or to leave the launcher behind. And so in that, I think they hit enough G-forces in a Soyuz abort on the launch pad that it did damage to the bodies of the astronauts. They survived and everything. It's just I think they're at least one of those astronauts is not allowed to fly again, or was not allowed to fly again. I think this happened in the 70s or 80s, but I could be wrong. Just illustrates that high G forces are survivable, but not ideal. And not just for comfort reasons, but it actually can compromise the bodies of important, expensive, feeling, suffering astronauts, which you don't want to do that. Anyway, as you can see from this beautiful graph, let's see if we can stretch it out. So we hit some pretty high G forces. We used a bit of a skipping reentry, not a full. I don't know if it was egg from KSP, KSP Realism Overhaul IRC, but somebody corrected me that a skipping reentry would have to like leave the atmosphere again. So this isn't a skipping reentry, but it's similar, right? The kind of the concepts apply in that you are controlling your downward velocity and your altitude to manage your peak accelerations and spread it out across multiple curves rather than just having one really high peak acceleration, really high peak heating rate, which would be much harder on your astronauts and also much harder on the re-entry ablator and system for your craft coming back. And yes, I pretty much just maintained the same altitude there, and which resulted in that double peak of accelerations, and then I went for a ballistic. I set it to ballistic for its final bit, which we hit another acceleration peak quick there right before it all tapered off. But that is how, so this is the last video showing how I will go about sending humans to the moon and returning them safely to the surface of the Earth. As we are 2 kilometers above the water which has decided to be invisible today, which I suppose is okay. I can survive with that. So we get to see down through to the ocean floor here, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. Where are we, by the way? Let me me just look again. So the clouds make it a little hard to tell. I can't... oh, I think that's Hawaii right there. Wow, I landed fairly close to Hawaii. What, maybe, I don't know, 400 kilometers or 400 miles, somewhere in that order. Not terribly far away, which is handy. I think they would have, with the right equipment, they would have been able to see us coming in. All right. Oh yeah, and my antenna was, I think it was on the nose bit, so it's gone. I no longer have an antenna. All right. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So we're just going to float down to the water here. So next, I believe I'll make a series of videos where I do what I just did with the Gemini Direct launcher and craft, etc. Except there will be a crew, and so the oh, and I'll have to make sure I get a contract for that, because it'd be a pretty good payoff for a contract of sending people to the moon, and I don't want to miss out on the science and cash that will come with that contract. And pick up any other obvious easy contracts that go along with that, like if there is a contract for sending people into orbit of the moon, for example, as long as it doesn't have very specific orbital parameters that I wouldn't be able to hit, I might accept that contract as well. Yeah, that's pretty obvious and easy future videos for me to do. Oh, bam! Smashed in the water, and stop bobbing around so we can recover vessel. All right. I still have a couple of craft on the way to Jupiter, and I'll probably still record those. Probably make those part of this playlist, I guess, this season of Realism Overhaul. And after this, I do plan to try to hold on to this save game of RP-0, because I'd ultimately like to send people to, at the very least, orbit of Mars. And a couple of other people have done videos since I said that, since I planned to do that, which is awesome, and I love their videos. And also a couple of people have told me they were going to do it. They've kind of made some picture sets and shared them with the Realism Overhaul IRC, which is awesome. And I'll have to think of my own unique way of doing it, my own unique mission that kind of fits my timeline here of hardware. I'm pretty sure I will develop Apollo hardware in order to do that. For a number of reasons, which I'll probably discuss later in those videos. I'll kind of develop Apollo hardware, but rather than developing Apollo in order to carry out the moon plan, the moon landings, here we are, let's fudge that by 2 years. So let's say by 1967 or so, we are hoping to have people landed on the moon at a much lower cost than the Apollo program, although not hugely cheaper, because we didn't have to develop the Apollo hardware or the lunar module. We did have to develop the Saturn V, of course. And so we were able to land people on the moon at that lower budget with Gemini hardware and a Saturn V at an earlier date. So that leaves us a bit more time and money in order to carry out other missions to hopefully send people towards Mars. So let me just quickly take a look here, since I've still got 2 minutes before this video hits my ideal kind of planned time. Let's see. Position. Do I have any active missions to... No. So I've got no active missions for the moon. I'm just missing them. Science data from the surface of the moon. Well, that's obvious. I'm going to get that. But I'm not sure why it's not giving me... Let's see. Crewed lunar landing. There it is. I just missed it visually. Duration expires. Yeah. So that'll give us 2 years to accomplish that. So we will definitely do that. We got a huge cash advance. I think a lot of people who are good at RP-0, unlike myself, they actually kind of plan their money based on that. They'll say, okay, well, what's the next mission we can do? If they feel confident they can carry it out, they will accept it and use the money they get in that advance for it. I haven't done that before. That's a good idea. I'm not sure why I didn't think of that or haven't carried that out. I generally will only accept a mission if I already have the cash to carry it out. But in the future, I'll probably do that because that makes more sense. All right, so thank you for watching RP-0 America. In the next set of videos, we will be sending humans to the surface of the moon to fulfill that tasty contract. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.